That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The cold Hereford rain fell in a steady patter, turning the gravel paths of Credenhill Garrison into slick mirrors that reflected the grey sky above. It was just past 600 hours, and the base stirred with the quiet efficiency of a British Army installation. Lorry engines rumbled faintly in the distance, delivering supplies to the quartermaster's stores, while the sharp crack of boots on the drill square echoed through the morning mist. Hereford, home to the Special Air Service, held its secrets close, but this day unfolded in the more ordinary rhythms of the regular infantry battalion stationed nearby, men and women drilled in the fundamentals of soldiering, far from the regiment's shadowed operations. Sergeant Ellis Harper stood at the edge of the parade square, his posture rigid as the downpour soaked through his camouflage jacket. At 38, Harper was a lance corporal in the 22nd Regiment, a man of few words whose competence was as unremarkable as the damp chill that clung to everything. His dark hair, cropped short beneath his beret, was flecked with early grey, and his eyes, steady, unblinking, scanned the ranks without favour. He had joined the army young, risen through the ranks on merit alone, but there was something about him that invited indifference from his peers. Perhaps it was the way he moved, deliberate, without flourish, as if every step conserved energy for an unseen purpose. The company assembled for morning parade, 100 souls forming neat lines under the watchful eye of Captain Reynolds, the company commander. Reynolds was a tall man, his voice carrying the clipped precision of Sandhurst training. "Fall in!" he barked, and the soldiers snapped to attention, rifles at the slope. The rain drummed on their helmets, but no one shifted. Discipline was the lifeblood of the British Army. It bound them tighter than blood. Harper took his place in the rear rank, his boots sinking slightly into the softening earth. To his left stood Private Jenkins, a fresh-faced recruit from Manchester, all bravado and loose limbs. Jenkins had taken to ribbing Harper in the barracks, nothing vicious, just the casual jabs of a man testing boundaries. "Steady on, Lance Corp," Jenkins had muttered the night before over a mug of stewed tea in the mess. "You march like you're carrying the weight of the world. Lighten up." The others had chuckled, the sound fading into the clatter of cutlery. Harper had said nothing, merely nodded and cleared his plate with the same quiet focus he applied to everything. Now, as the roll call began, the sergeant major's voice cut through the drizzle like a bayonet. "Private Ellis Harper." It was a slip. Harper's rank was lance corporal, but in the haste of the wet morning, names blurred. Harper responded crisply. "Here, Sergeant Major." No correction, no fuss. That was his way. The parade continued. The orders barked in that familiar cadence. Stand easy, inspection arms, quick march. The square filled with the thud of boots, synchronized to perfection, a testament to the unyielding hierarchy that governed their lives. But beneath the routine, a tension simmered. Whispers had circulated in the mess hall the previous evening, rumors of an impending exercise, a joint operation with elements from the SAS training cadre. The regiment's presence always brought a hush to the base, their operators ghosts in plain sight, blending into the landscape with an aura of unspoken authority. No one knew the details. Operational security was ironclad, yet the air felt heavier today, as if the rain carried whispers of something more. As the company dismissed for equipment checks, Harper lingered, adjusting the straps on his Bergen with methodical care. Jenkins sidled up, wiping rain from his brow. "Blimey, Harper, you're like a statue out there. Ever think of smiling? Makes you look half dead." A few lads nearby snorted, their laughter muffled by the hoods pulled low. Harper met Jenkins's gaze evenly, his expression unchanging. "Focus on your kit, Private," he said softly, his voice carrying the flat vowels of the Midlands. No anger, no retort, just the quiet redirection of a man who had long since learned to let words slide off him like the rain. The group moved towards the armory, boots squelching on the wet concrete. The smell of oiled metal and damp wool hung in the air, mingled with the faint tang of boiled cabbage from the cookhouse. Captain Reynolds paused by the entrance, his eyes narrowing on Harper. "Lance Corporal." Your section's leading the patrol simulation this afternoon. See to it there are no lapses. It was a standard order, but delivered with the subtle edge that Harper had come to recognize, a test, perhaps, of his reliability in front of the men. Harper saluted sharply. "Yes, sir." As Reynolds turned away, Jenkins leaned in, voice low. "Leading? You? They must be short on volunteers." The jab landed, drawing a ripple of amusement from the others. Harper's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but he said nothing, shouldering his Bergen and stepping into the armory's dim light. Inside, the racks of SA-80 rifles gleamed under fluorescent bulbs, each weapon a symbol of the precision demanded of them all. Unseen by the others, beneath the cuff of Harper's sleeve, a faint scar traced his forearm, a thin line pale against his skin from a wound long healed. It was the kind of mark that spoke of nights in distant sands, of shadows and silenced rifles. But Harper bore it without comment. His past was his own, buried under layers of routine and restraint. As the morning wore on, the base hummed with preparation. Lorries idled in the motor pool, their engines coughing against the cold. In the distance, the faint outline of the Brecon beacons loomed through the mist, a reminder of the rigors that forged them. No one could have foreseen how the day's training would unravel, how a single moment of injustice on the drill square would draw eyes from the regiment itself. For now, it was just another rainy morning in Hereford, boots echoing, orders given, and a quiet soldier enduring in silence. The afternoon patrol simulation unfolded under a sky that had thickened to an unrelenting slate grey, the Hereford rain now a persistent drizzle that seeped into every seam and fold of their combat gear. Credenhill Garrison's training area stretched out beyond the perimeter fence, a patchwork of sodden fields and low hedgerows, scarred by the tracks of previous exercises. The company had divided into sections, each tasked with navigating a mock urban assault course that mimicked the tight confines of a contested village. Captain Reynolds oversaw from the observation post a raised platform of splintered wood and sandbags, his binoculars sweeping the ground with the methodical sweep of a man who trusted little to chance. Lance Corporal Ellis Harper led his section forward, his movements economical as he signaled the advance with a raised fist. The four men behind him, Jenkins, Privates Malone and Davies, and the hulking form of Corporal Tate, mirrored his pace, their boots sinking into the mud with muffled thuds. Harper's voice when he spoke was low and precise, carrying just far enough over the patter of rain. Eyes on the flanks. Malone cover left, slow and steady. No barked commands, no unnecessary volume. His instructions wove into the rhythm of their advance like threads in a well-worn uniform. They had been at it for hours, the exercise designed to test endurance as much as tactics. The air smelled of wet earth, and the faint, acrid bite of blank ammunition, fired in controlled bursts to simulate contact. Harper's section had cleared the first objective, a cluster of plywood mock-ups representing enemy positions, without a hitch. He had spotted the tripwire first, a thin filament stretched across the path, and halted the group with a subtle hand gesture. "Down," he murmured, and they dropped prone into the muck, bellies to the ground as he disarmed it with a steady hand. Competence like that came from years of repetition, but to the others, it was just Harper being Harper, reliable, unflashy, the sort of soldier who faded into the background. Back at the regroup point, as they caught their breath under the dripping eaves of a portable shelter, Jenkins wiped mud from his face and grinned sidelong at Harper. "Nice one with the wire, Lance Corp. Almost like you've done this before." "Oh, wait, you have. Every sodding day." The words were light, but laced with that undercurrent of mockery that had become routine. Malone chuckled, leaning against a crate of spent casings. "Yeah, Harper's got the instincts of a bloody badger. Digs in and never comes out." Davies joined in, his Liverpool accent thickening the jab. "Or a ghost, you ever see him off duty? Man probably sleeps with his boots on." Harper adjusted the sling on his SA-80, his expression unchanging as he checked the magazine. Rain traced rivulets down his helmet brim, pooling at the edge before dripping onto his collar. He met their eyes one by one, his gaze steady but devoid of challenge. "Kit check," he said simply, turning to inspect Tate's webbing. The corporal, a broad-shouldered veteran from the Welsh borders, nodded approval, but said nothing. He had long since learned that Harper's silences were not weakness but a deliberate choice. The banter died as quickly as it had flared, the group falling back into the quiet rhythm of maintenance, cleaning weapons, redistributing ammo, ensuring no loose ends. From the observation post, Captain Reynolds lowered his binoculars, his face a mask of professional detachment. He conferred briefly with the platoon sergeant, a wiry man named Baxter, whose voice carried the gravel of too many cigarettes. "Harper's section is solid, sir. No errors." Reynolds nodded, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a subtle assessment, as if weighing the lance corporal against some invisible standard. The company commander had commanded respect through his career, but he ruled his men with the firm hand of tradition, where hierarchy demanded not just obedience, but the appearance of it. Harper's quiet ways sometimes chafed against that, his lack of camaraderie seen as aloofness rather than focus. As the sections rotated for the next phase, a night navigation drill postponed by the weather, the company converged on the mess tent for a brief stand-easy. The canvas structure sagged under the weight of rain, its interior a haze of steam from urns of hot tea and the sizzle of frying sausages on a portable stove. Soldiers queued in orderly lines, tin mugs in hand, the clink of metal and low murmur of conversation filling the space. Harper took his place at the end, his Bergen slung over one shoulder, water still beading on his sleeves. Jenkins, ahead in line, turned with a tray balanced precariously, sausages, beans, a slab of bread sodden from the steam. "Here, mate," he said to Malone, passing it over. But in the shuffle, his elbow caught the edge. The tray tipped, spilling its contents across the muddy floor in a splatter of grease and gravy. Jenkins cursed under his breath, drawing a few glances, but it was Harper who stepped forward without a word, grabbing a spare cloth from the counter to kneel and wipe it up. The act was automatic, unthinking, part of the unspoken code that kept the unit functioning. "Clumsy bugger," Jenkins muttered, but his tone held no real apology as he accepted a fresh tray. As Harper rose, hands stained with the mess, a ripple of laughter spread from the group. Tate clapped Jenkins on the back. "Watch it next time, or Harper'll be your personal orderly." The words landed like pebbles in a pond, stirring amusement but no real malice, or so it seemed. Harper straightened, his posture impeccable despite the damp and dirt, and simply nodded. "No harm done," he said, voice even, before collecting his own meal and finding a seat at the edge of the tent. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming on the canvas like distant gunfire. The base's routines pressed on. A lorry trundled past, laden with crates for the quartermaster. In the distance, the faint call of a bugle signaled the end of another shift at the guardroom. Whispers of the SAS cadre lingered in the air, rumors that a selection team was embedded for the week, observing from the shadows, their presence as subtle as the mist rolling in from the Wye Valley. No one approached them. The regiment's operators moved through the base like specters, their berets the only giveaway, sand-colored and beaded with rain. Harper ate in silence, his fork moving with measured strokes, eyes fixed on the middle distance. The scar on his forearm itched faintly under the damp fabric, a reminder of heat and dust far removed from this chill. He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the tasks ahead. Discipline held them all. It was the thread that bound private to major, recruit to veteran. Yet, in the quiet corners of his mind, Harper carried the weight of unspoken burdens, missions that had demanded more than orders, choices that had tested the soul. For now, though, he endured a quiet figure in the hierarchy, mocked but unmoved. As the stand-easy ended, and the company reformed for the march back to barracks, the tension coiled a little tighter. The drill square awaited, its concrete slick and unforgiving, where the next orders would demand precision under scrutiny. No one yet knew how fragile that order could prove, how a single lapse in the ranks would expose the cracks beneath the surface. The company marched back from the training area in tight formation, the rhythm of their boots a steady cadence against the sodden gravel path. The drizzle had eased to a fine mist, but the chill lingered, seeping into joints and dampening spirits, as the late afternoon light faded to a muted grey. Credon Hill Garrison's barracks loomed ahead, squat blocks of brick and concrete huddled against the Welsh border's relentless weather. Lance Corporal Ellis Harper brought up the rear of his section, his SA-80 slung across his chest, eyes scanning the flanks out of habit. The weight of his burden pulled at his shoulders, but he carried it without complaint, his breath even despite the exertion. Captain Reynolds led the way, his stride purposeful, barking occasional corrections to stragglers. "Eyes front, lads, no slouching in the ranks." The platoon sergeant Baxter flanked him, his gravelly voice adding emphasis to the commands. The hierarchy was etched into every movement. Officers at the fore, non-commissioned officers enforcing the line, and the privates falling in behind like shadows. It was a structure forged in the fires of tradition, unyielding as the rain-soaked hills that encircled the base. As they approached the drill square for the evening inspection, the air grew thicker with anticipation. The square itself was a vast expanse of weathered concrete, bordered by low walls and the distant hum of the motor pool. Floodlights flickered on, casting long shadows that danced with the mist. Soldiers from other companies were already assembling, their silhouettes sharp against the gathering dusk. The sergeant major, a towering figure named Hargrove, stood at the center, his pace stick tapping rhythmically against his boot. "Form up, by sections, smartly now." Harper's group peeled off to their position, the men shaking out their limbs to shake off the mud. Jenkins, still buzzing from the day's exertions, nudged Malone with his elbow. "Think Harper's got a medal for cleaning up spills? Or to pin it on his chest?" The words were muttered, but loud enough to carry in the quiet before the full parade. A few heads turned, smirks hidden behind collars pulled high. Harper ignored it, adjusting his beret with a precise tug and fixing his gaze on the horizon. Silence was his shield, honed over years of service where words often betrayed more than they defended. The inspection began with the precision of a well-oiled mechanism. Hargrove paced the ranks, his eyes like gimlets, probing for the slightest imperfection. Webbing aligned, rifles at the slope, no excuses for slovenliness. He moved down the line, pausing at Private Davies to adjust a loose strap, his voice a low growl. "Standards, soldier, or find yourself scrubbing latrines till dawn." The private nodded stiffly, color rising in his cheeks. When Hargrove reached Harper's section, the air seemed to tighten. Jenkins stood ramrod straight, but his eyes flicked sideways, a glint of mischief in them. As the sergeant major inspected Malone's kit, Jenkins shifted his weight, just enough to jostle Harper's elbow. It was subtle, an accident born of boredom and the day's pent-up energy. Harper's SA-80, balanced at the slope, slipped from his grasp, clattering to the concrete with a metallic ring that echoed across the square like a gunshot. The parade froze. Heads snapped towards the sound, a ripple of surprise breaking the rigid lines. Hargrove whirled, his face hardening into a mask of disapproval. "Lance Corporal Harper, what in blazes was that?" His voice boomed, carrying the weight of authority that demanded immediate accountability. Jenkins stepped back half a pace, his expression feigning shock, while Malone and Davies exchanged glances that spoke volumes, sympathy laced with the thrill of schadenfreude. Harper bent swiftly to retrieve the rifle, his movements controlled, devoid of panic. He rose, weapon back at the slope, and met Hargrove's glare without flinching. "My error, Sergeant Major, it won't happen again." His tone was even, the Midlands accent flat and unadorned, offering no defense, no plea. The scar on his forearm burned faintly under the sleeve as he gripped the stock tighter, but he pushed the sensation aside. This was the army. Mistakes were owned, consequences borne in silence. Hargrove's eyes narrowed, assessing. "Error? In front of the entire company? You'll report to the guardroom after parade for extra duties. And the rest of you, eyes front. This isn't a circus." He continued down the line, but the damage lingered. Whispers hissed like steam from a kettle. "Clumsy sod," from the back ranks. "Harper's off his game today," murmured by a corporal nearby. Jenkins, emboldened by the escape, leaned towards Tate under the cover of standing at ease. "Told you he marches like he's half asleep, drops his bloody rifle like a recruit." Captain Reynolds, observing from the saluting base, made a note in his pad, his expression inscrutable. He had seen enough inspections to know when a lapse was isolated and when it hinted at deeper issues. Harper's competence was unquestioned in the field, but here, under the public eye, appearances mattered as much as actions. The hierarchy demanded not just skill but the projection of it, unwavering, without cracks. As the parade resumed, orders for dismissal, the snap of salutes, Harper stood unmoved, his posture a bastion of restraint. The mist clung to his uniform, cold against his skin, mirroring the chill of isolation that settled in his chest. He had faced worse than dropped rifles. Nights in arid wastes where a single slip meant lives lost, shadows that demanded silence even in the face of chaos. But voicing that past would shatter the veil he had drawn around himself, a necessary barrier in a world of rigid ranks and unspoken judgments. The company dispersed towards the barracks, the clatter of boots fading into the evening routine. Lights winked on in the mess hall, promising warmth and rations, but for Harper the walk felt longer. Jenkins clapped Malone on the shoulder, laughing off the incident as they went. "Did you see Hargrove's face? Priceless. Harper's in for it now, polishing boots till his fingers bleed." The group moved on, their banter a buffer against the base's encroaching quiet. Harper lingered at the edge of the square, watching them go. The concrete beneath his feet gleamed wetly under the floodlights, reflecting fragments of the sky. In the distance, the faint outline of SAS training grounds blurred into the hills, a realm apart where legends were forged in secrecy. He rolled his shoulders, easing the tension, and turned towards the guardroom. Duty called as it always did, and silence was his response. No one grabbed his sleeve that evening, but the weight of eyes followed him like an unseen hand. The mockery had landed publicly now, a stain on the uniform of his reputation, yet Harper endured. The base settled into night, the low rumble of generators, the scent of damp wool and engine oil, the clipped exchanges of sentries at their posts. Whispers of the embedded SAS cadre persisted, their presence a subtle undercurrent, observing from the periphery. But for the moment the injustice hung in the air, a test of resolve amid the unyielding march of military life. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach. The guardroom at Credenhill Garrison stood as a squat sentinel against the encroaching night, its brick walls etched with the faint scars of past repaints, now dulled by the persistent mist. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of polished leather and stale coffee from a pot left simmering too long on the stove. Lance Corporal Ellis Harper reported as ordered, his boots leaving faint tracks of damp on the linoleum floor. The duty sergeant, a stocky man from the Signals Corps with a moustache like a broom bristle, glanced up from his ledger. "Extra duties, Harper. Rifle drop, was it? Right, you'll be on sentry rotation till midnight. No slacking." Harper nodded, his response a simple, "Understood, Sergeant," before stepping out to relieve the current watch. The perimeter fence stretched into the gloom, wire glinting under the sodium lamps that buzzed faintly overhead. He took up position at the eastern gate, SA-80 at the ready, eyes sweeping the shadowed tree line where the Y-Valley's fields met the base's edge. The cold bit through his gloves, but he stood immobile, a statue in olive drab, his breath forming brief clouds that dissolved into the chill. Thoughts of the drill square lingered, the clatter of metal, the sting of Hargrove's glare, the undercurrent of laughter from Jenkins and the others, but he compartmentalized them, folding them away like a neatly packed valise. Endurance was not about confrontation, it was about presence, unwavering. Hours passed in the measured tick of his watch, the base settling into its nocturnal hush. Lorries rumbled sporadically from the motor pool, their headlights cutting brief swathes through the fog, while the distant call of a fox pierced the quiet from the hills. Harper's relief came at 23:50, the incoming private murmuring a perfunctory, "All quiet," to which Harper replied with a curt affirmative. He made his way back to the barracks, the gravel crunching softly underfoot, the weight of the day easing only slightly with the promise of a narrow bunk and a few hours' rest. Dawn broke with the same indifferent grey as the day before, the rain holding off, but leaving the air saturated, heavy as wet wool. Harper rose at 5:30, as always, folding his blanket with geometric precision before heading to the ablutions block. The mirrors there were fogged, the drip of faulty taps a constant underscore to the low voices of men shaving and washing. He avoided the mirrors, splashing water on his face and running a hand over his stubble, the scar on his forearm catching a glimpse of light as he rolled up his sleeve. It was no tattoo, but a precise line, surgical and faded, the remnant of a through and through in a place where silence had been the only ally. He tugged the cuff down, securing it with a button, and joined the queue for breakfast in the mess hall. The hall buzzed with subdued energy, the clatter of trays and the aroma of porridge and bacon grease filling the space. Harper collected his ration, oatmeal, toast, a mug of builder's tea strong enough to stand a spoon in, and took a seat at a corner table, away from the clusters of animated conversation. Jenkins and his group occupied the center benches, their voices carrying snippets of the previous evening's ribbing. "Harper's got sentry legs now, stiff as a board," Jenkins said, eliciting a chuckle from Malone. Harper ate methodically, his fork scraping the plate in even intervals, gaze fixed on the steam rising from his tea. No retort formed. Words would only amplify the echo. As the company finished and began filing out for morning parade, a subtle shift rippled through the routine. From the far end of the hall near the officers' entrance, two figures entered without fanfare, men in sand-colored berets, their uniforms unmarked by insignia, beyond the winged dagger patch that denoted the Special Air Service. They were not announced. No bugle or barked introduction heralded their arrival. One was tall, lean as a blade, with a face weathered by sun and wind, the lines around his eyes speaking of nights spent in observation rather than sleep. The other, shorter and broader, moved with the coiled readiness of a spring, his gaze sweeping the room in a single unhurried arc. These were the cadre Harper had heard whispered about, observers from the regiment, embedded to assess potential for selection or to oversee joint drills. They carried no airs, blending into the periphery like shadows at dusk. The taller man, Major Elias Thorne, though ranks were seldom invoked aloud in their world, scanned the departing soldiers with the detachment of a man who had seen 1,000 such mornings. His companion, Sergeant Callum Reed, paused briefly by the serving counter, accepting a mug of tea with a nod to the cook. They took seats at an empty table, their conversation limited to murmurs, voices pitched low enough to evade casual ears. Thorne's eyes, sharp and assessing, drifted across the hall, lingering not on the boisterous groups but on the quieter figures, the soldier who polished his boots without flourish, the one who checked his webbing twice over. Discipline was their metric, the subtle markers of potential amid the ordinariness. As Harper rose to return his tray, something caught Thorne's attention, a momentary glimpse as the lance corporal extended his arm to stack the plate. The cuff rode up just enough to reveal the scar's edge, pale and linear against the skin, positioned in a way that spoke of restraint under fire, not accident. Thorne's expression remained impassive, but his posture shifted imperceptibly. Shoulders evening, gaze holding a fraction longer. Reed noticed the look, following it to Harper, who moved away without awareness, his steps measured towards the exit. Outside, the parade square awaited, the concrete still slick from the night's dew, boots already echoing in preliminary drills. The company formed up under Hargrove's watchful eye, the air crisp with the scent of wet grass and distant wood smoke from the cookhouse. Harper took his place in the ranks, rifle at the slope, the hierarchy reasserting itself in salutes and snaps to attention. Captain Reynolds arrived shortly after, conferring with the sergeant major before turning to address the formation. "Today we integrate with the SAS observation team for advanced patrolling. Standards will be exemplary, no lapses tolerated." The words hung in the air, a subtle tightening of the already rigid lines. Thorne and Reed positioned themselves at the edge of the square, apart from the main body, their presence a quiet pressure rather than a command. As the company executed its first evolutions, quick march, halt, about turn, Thorne watched Harper specifically now, noting the precision of his footfall, the way his eyes scanned the flanks even in drill, as if anticipating threats beyond the square's bounds. It was not showmanship. It was ingrained, the mark of one who had operated in the grey zones where the regiment thrived. During a brief stand-easy, as soldiers adjusted slings and whispered complaints about the cold, Reed approached the ranks unannounced, his boots silent on the concrete. He stopped near Harper's section, eyes on Jenkins, who was mid-jest with Davies. "Private," Reed said, his voice a low timbre, carrying the soft burr of the Scottish borders. Jenkins straightened, surprise flickering across his face. "Sir?" "Discipline in the field starts here," Reed continued, gesturing to the square. Mockery erodes it. Focus. No raised tone, no rebuke, just the weight of observation, delivered with the stillness of a man who had stared down worse than banter. Jenkins nodded, color draining from his cheeks, and the group fell silent. Harper, standing adjacent, met Reed's gaze briefly. There was no recognition, no warmth, but a flicker of assessment passed between them, unspoken. Thorne, from his vantage, observed the exchange, his mind turning to fragments of classified briefs. A sniper operation in the Helmand dust, 12 men pinned in a kill zone, extracted by a shot from the shadows they never saw. The scar's position matched, a graze from suppressive fire, earned in saving the trapped patrol. Harper's face, though lined by routine, aligned with the grainy photo from the after-action report. A ghost from a mission long buried under official seals. The drill resumed, the thud of boots resuming its cadence, but the air had changed. The SAS men's stillness spoke volumes, respect not in words, but in the quiet intensity of their watch. Harper felt the weight of unseen eyes, a prickle at the base of his neck, but he pressed on, posture unyielding. The base's routines ground forward, the clip of orders, the scent of oiled rifles, the chill wind whispering from the beacons, but beneath it, observation deepened, hints of a hidden past stirring like mist rising from the valley floor. No one else noticed. The hierarchy shielded such secrets, but for Thorne and Reed, the pieces began to align in silence. The afternoon sun struggled through the persistent overcast, casting a pallid light across the drill square at Credenhill Garrison. The mist had burned off slightly, leaving the air sharp and laced with the earthy tang of damp concrete and distant diesel fumes from the motor pool. The company had reformed after a midday brief, now arrayed in precise ranks for a joint demonstration, an advanced patrolling exercise overseen by the SAS cadre. Captain Reynolds stood at the saluting base, his posture erect as he outlined the scenario, a simulated extraction under simulated fire, blending regular infantry with the regiment's observational input. Precision and restraint, he emphasized, his voice carrying the measured cadence of command. No deviations. The observers will note every detail. Lance Corporal Ellis Harper occupied his position in the second rank, his SA-80 held at the slope with mechanical familiarity. The morning's routines had blurred into this. Equipment checks completed, webbing adjusted, the subtle ache in his shoulders from sentry duty a familiar companion. Jenkins and the others stood nearby, their banter subdued since Reed's quiet intervention, though sidelong glances still carried the residue of yesterday's mockery. Harper's expression remained neutral, eyes fixed forward on the horizon where the Brecon beacon's outline smudged against the sky. He had felt the weight of Thorne and Reed's scrutiny during the earlier drills, their stillness a pressure more tangible than barked orders, but attributed it to the cadre's habitual assessment, potential for selection, perhaps, or simply the grind of evaluation. His scar itched faintly under the cuff, a ghost of heat and dust he had long compartmentalized. Major Thorne and Sergeant Reed positioned themselves to the side of the square, apart from the officers' cluster, their sand-colored berets the only overt mark of distinction. Thorne's face betrayed nothing, but his mind sifted through the fragments, the after-action report from Helmand 5 years prior, classified beyond even most SAS eyes. 12 soldiers, a mixed patrol of infantry and embedded advisors, pinned in a wadi kill zone, rounds cracking the air like whips. The sniper who had covered their exfil had fired from 2 kilometers out, Shadows his only ally, a single suppressed rifle threading the needle between chaos and salvation. No name in the brief, just a call sign, Wraith. And that scar, grazed by return fire as he held position for the final extraction. Harper's build, his gait, the precise economy of his movements, it aligned too neatly to be coincidence. The demonstration commenced with a low command from Reynolds. Sections, advance. The company moved as one, boots striking the concrete in synchronized thuds that echoed off the surrounding barracks. Harper's section led the mock patrol, navigating a cordoned area marked by white tape and plywood barriers, simulating urban cover. He signaled left flank, his hand a subtle arc, and the men responded without hesitation, Malone covering high ground, Tate anchoring the rear. the air filled with the pop of blank rounds from hidden umpires, simulating contact. But Harper's voice cut through cleanly. Suppress and bound. Steady. No flourish, just the clipped efficiency that had drawn Thorne's initial notice. As the section cleared the objective, a cluster of mock buildings, the formation regrouped at the square's edge for debrief. Soldiers stood at ease, breaths steadying while Reynolds conferred with Hargrove. The SAS men remained at their post, but Reed's gaze locked on Harper, a subtle nod passing between him and Thorne. It was time. The pieces demanded alignment not in whispers, but in the unyielding light of public scrutiny. Thorne stepped forward unannounced, his boots silent on the gravel fringe, drawing every eye in the ranks. The company stilled, the hierarchy bending instinctively to the regiment's presence, no salutes demanded. But respect etched in the sudden quiet. "Lance Corporal Harper," Thorne said, his voice low and even, carrying the faint lilt of the West Country, pitched just loud enough for the front ranks to hear. Harper turned, posture snapping to attention, his eyes meeting Thorne's without a flicker of recognition or surprise. The square held its breath. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably. The earlier jabs now a distant echo in the tension. Thorne's expression was impassive, but his stance, shoulders squared, hands clasped behind his back, conveyed an authority deeper than rank. "You lead with the quiet that saves lives," Thorne continued, the words deliberate, hanging in the chill air. He paused, eyes tracing the line of Harper's sleeve where the cuff met wrist. "A mark like yours, I've seen it before. Helmand, 18, Wadi extraction. 12 men trapped, rounds walking the ground towards them. The shot from the ridge. Unseen, but it bought them the breath to pull out." A murmur rippled through the ranks, heads turning, but no one spoke. Reynolds stepped closer, brow furrowing in confusion, while Hargrove's pace stick ceased its tap. Harper's face remained a mask, but internally the barriers cracked. The weight of that night flooding back, the scope's crosshairs steady on the patrol's flank, the suppressed crack of his L115A3, the graze tearing across his arm as he covered the last man. Classified, buried, he had returned to regular ranks at his own request. The regiment's shadows too consuming for a man seeking only duty's rhythm. Thorne's gaze held Harper's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, respect forged in fire, unspoken. "Wraith," he said softly, the call sign a key turning in a long locked door. "You saved us that day, the regiment doesn't forget." He raised his hand in a slow salute, not flamboyant, but precise, fingers to brow, eyes unwavering. Reed mirrored it from his position, the gesture rippling outward like a stone in still water. The square froze. Jenkins's face paled, his earlier mockery curdling into shame. Malone and Davies exchanged wide-eyed glances, the laughter of days past evaporating. Captain Reynolds straightened, realization dawning in his features, while the rear ranks leaned forward, whispers dying as the truth settled. Harper returned the salute crisply, his voice a murmur, "Just the job, sir." No elaboration, no demand for vindication, British restraint in its purest form, emotion contained in the set of his jaw, the steady rise of his chest. Thorne nodded once, lowering his hand. "Carry on, Lance Corporal." He turned away, Reed falling in step, their departure as unobtrusive as their arrival. But the air had shifted irrevocably. Shame spread through the ranks like mist over the valley, respect rising in its wake. Harper stood unmoved, the scar now a badge unseen but felt, his hidden past laid bare not in thunder, but in the quiet gravity of recognition. The company reformed slowly, orders resuming their clip, but eyes lingered on him now, with a new measure of stillness, the hierarchy bending to honor earned in silence. As the demonstration concluded, the base's routines reasserted themselves, the distant rumble of a lorry, the scent of wet earth carried on the breeze. Yet for the soldiers assembled, the moment etched itself, a testament to moral courage amid the ranks, where injustice yielded to the unyielding truth of service. Harper shouldered his burden, steps measured as ever, the weight lighter now, though he bore it with the same reserve. The hills watched indifferently, but in the hearts of those who had mocked, transformation had begun. The floodlights on the drill square at Credenhill Garrison hummed faintly, their amber glow cutting through the lingering mist, like blades of subdued light. The company stood frozen in the aftermath of Major Thorne's words, the air thick with the scent of damp concrete and the faint metallic tang of oiled rifles cooling from the demonstration. Lance Corporal Ellis Harper held his salute, his arm steady, the faint tremor of memory confined to the pulse beneath his skin. The call sign, Wraith, hung unspoken now, its echo rippling through the ranks like a suppressed round finding its mark. No one moved. The hierarchy, so rigidly enforced moments before, seemed suspended, bent under the weight of revelation. Captain Reynolds stepped forward, his face a study in restrained composure, the lines around his mouth tightening as he processed the implications. He had commanded this company for 3 years, overseeing drills and deployments with the unyielding precision of his Sandhurst commission, yet this moment pierced the veil of routine authority. "Major Thorne," he said, voice low and measured, "if I may, classified matters?" It was not a challenge but a deferral, the clipped tone acknowledging boundaries he had not crossed. Thorne turned slightly, his posture unchanging, the sand-colored beret casting a shadow across his weathered features. "Not classified here, Captain. Not anymore." His reply was even, devoid of elaboration, the West Country inflection softening the edges without diminishing the gravity. He glanced back at Harper, eyes meeting the Lance Corporal's in a brief, unyielding lock. 2 soldiers bound by shared silences, forged in the unforgiving theaters where words were luxuries. Reed stood a pace behind, his broad frame still as stone, the salute he had mirrored now lowered, but its imprint lingering in the set of his shoulders. The ranks began to stir, but not with disruption. It was a collective exhalation, breaths released in unison as the truth settled. Jenkins, positioned 2 files over, felt the color drain from his face, the casual jabs of the past days curdling into a knot low in his gut. He had ribbed Harper over spilled trays and dropped rifles, the mockery a harmless ritual in the barracks' dim light. But now it reframed as something sharper, ingratitude towards a man whose shadow had shielded lives. His eyes dropped to the concrete, boots shifting imperceptibly, the shame a private tide washing through him. Malone beside him swallowed hard, his earlier chuckles now a distant embarrassment. He straightened his webbing with unnecessary focus, gaze averted from Harper's direction. In the rear ranks, whispers died before they formed, replaced by a hush that amplified the distant rumble of a lorry in the motor pool. Private Davies, the Liverpudlian whose banter had fueled the group's levity, met Tate's eyes briefly. The corporal's broad face etched with quiet realization. They had dismissed Harper as the steady plodder, the one who endured without complaint, but the scar's glimpse, the call sign's weight painted him anew. A sniper who had held a ridge alone, his L115A3 threading precision through chaos to cover 12 souls in a Helmand Wadi. The patrol's after-action, briefed in fragments to those cleared for it, had spoken of an unseen guardian, shots cracking from the dark that bought precious seconds for extraction. Harper had been that shadow, then vanished back into the ranks, his request for reassignment a deliberate fade into obscurity. Sergeant Major Hargrove, pace stick now gripped like an anchor, cleared his throat, the sound gravelly in the stillness. "Company. Stand at ease." His command was softer than usual, lacking the bark that customarily sliced through lapses. He positioned himself nearer to Harper, not intrusively but with a subtle alignment, a non-commissioned officer recognizing merit beyond the uniform. The gesture was unspoken, but clear. Respect recalibrating the chain of command, hierarchy yielding to honor earned in the unseen. Harper lowered his salute, his expression unaltered, the Midland's flatness of his features a bulwark against the surge within. Internally, the barriers he had maintained, the deliberate anonymity after Helmand, fractured not with triumph, but with a quiet release. He had chosen the routine of Credenhill over the regiment's perpetual vigilance, seeking the rhythm of ordinary soldiering, where mockery was a lesser burden than the ghosts of the ridge. The graze on his forearm, once a private talisman, now bridged past and present without demand. He nodded once to Thorne, a fractional incline of the head, before turning back to the ranks, posture impeccable as ever. Reynolds addressed the company, his voice steadying the formation. "This demonstration and its lessons ends here, dismissed by sections." The orders resumed their cadence, but laced with a new undercurrent, boots striking concrete with measured respect, eyes lingering on Harper not with pity, but with the stillness of acknowledgement. As the men dispersed towards the barracks, clusters formed differently now. Jenkins falling in step beside Malone, their conversation muted, voices pitched low as they processed the shift. "Didn't know," Jenkins murmured, the admission hanging heavy. No apologies voiced yet. In the British way, reform came through action, not effusion. Thorne and Reed withdrew to the periphery, their observation complete, blending once more into the base's fabric. Thorne paused briefly by the saluting base, exchanging a nod with Reynolds. A silent pact to let the moment integrate without fanfare. The Major's mind turned to the regiment's ledgers, where Harper's file would remain sealed, but his legacy etched in the memories of those 12 saved men, now scattered across postings but united in quiet debt. As the square emptied, the chill wind whispered from the beacons, carrying the faint scent of wet heather and pine. Harper shouldered his burgan, the weight familiar, and walked the gravel path alone, the floodlights casting his shadow long and unyielding. Shame had spread through the ranks like ground mist, dissolving the casual dismissals. Respect rose in its place, subtle as the dawn's first light. No medals pinned, no speeches lauded, just the transformation of glances, the recalibration of silences. In the hierarchy of the British Army, such recognition was the truest reform. Moral courage, affirmed not in thunder but in the enduring quiet of duty. From that afternoon onward, the base's rhythms adjusted imperceptibly. In the mess hall, trays passed without incident, banter tempered by memory. Harper's competence, once overlooked, became the unspoken benchmark, sections seeking his lead in drills, Hargrove assigning him to mentor the newer recruits. Whispers evolved from mockery to murmurs of the one who held the ridge, the story circulating in fragments, a legend born of restraint rather than spectacle. The cold Hereford evenings settled in, rain pattering against barrack windows as soldiers gathered over mugs of tea. Jenkins approached Harper one such night, not with words, but with a nod and an offered seat at the table, a gesture of amends accepted without comment. The transformation rippled outward, officers like Reynolds incorporating elements of advanced observation into company briefs, drawing on the unseen lessons of the regiment. Harper remained the same, deliberate steps, unblinking gaze, but the isolation lifted, replaced by a quiet solidarity that bound the unit tighter. In the broader tapestry of military life, such moments were rare, injustice confronted not by outburst but by the gravity of truth. British discipline, with its emphasis on internal resolve, found vindication here, silent honor prevailing over the fractures of hierarchy. Harper's past, once buried, now informed the present without defining it, a reminder that true service endured beyond the parade square's edges. If this story already has your respect, hit the like button. It helps the story of Ellis Harper reach those who still believe in honor. The weeks following the demonstration on Credenhill's drill square unfolded with the unhurried cadence of military routine, the base's rhythms resuming their steady pulse amid the persistent chill of the Welsh borders. The cold Hereford rain returned in earnest, drumming against the barrack roofs like a muffled tattoo, while the gravel paths gleamed slick under the sodium lamps that flickered on at dusk. Lance Corporal Ellis Harper moved through it all with the same deliberate economy, his boots striking the concrete in measured steps, his SA-80s shouldered without flourish. The revelation from Major Thorne had not altered his duties, no promotions announced, no fanfare in the orders of the day, but it had reshaped the invisible currents that bound the company, subtle as the mist rolling in from the Wye Valley. In the mess hall, the air hung heavy with the aroma of stewed tea and boiled potatoes, the clatter of trays a familiar underscore to the low hum of conversation. Harper took his seat at the corner table as always, his tin mug steaming faintly, the scar on his forearm hidden beneath the cuff of his sleeve. Jenkins, once quick with a jab, now approached with a different posture, shoulders squared but eyes averted, a mug in hand as he paused nearby. "Mind if I join, Lance Corp?" The words were clipped, laced with the awkwardness of amends unspoken, his Manchester accent softened by restraint. Harper nodded once, gaze steady on his plate, and Jenkins sat, the silence between them thick but not hostile. No apologies spilled forth. In the British Army, such gestures were earned through consistency, not effusion. From that evening on, the private's banter shifted, directed at others now, or tempered with a nod of deference when Harper passed. The transformation rippled outward through the ranks, quiet as the dawn patrol's first whistle. Private Malone, whose chuckles had once fueled the group's levity, began seeking Harper's input during equipment checks, his questions posed with the deference of a man reassessing foundations. "How'd you spot that wire in the sim, sir? Technique?" It was not deference to rank alone, but to the unseen competence now illuminated, the sniper's eye that had held a ridge in Helmand, threading shots through the dust to shield 12 trapped souls. Davies and Tate followed suit, their Liverpool quips and Welsh reserve aligning into a subtle solidarity during section briefs. In the armory, where the scent of gun oil mingled with damp wool, conversations turned to tactics rather than teasing, Harper's quiet observations drawing nods rather than shrugs. Captain Reynolds observed it all from the periphery, his Sandhurst polish intact as he paced the platoon sergeant's office, the walls lined with faded maps and the faint scent of pipe tobacco lingering from Hargrove's breaks. The company commander had reviewed the after-action fragments cleared for his level, enough to grasp the outline, a classified extraction where an unseen marksman had turned the tide, his position compromised only by a grazing round that left a precise scar. Reynolds had conferred privately with Thorne via secure line, the major's voice even over the static. Harper's choice to step back. The regiment respects that. Let him lead in his way. No further details, operational security held like iron. But in company orders, Reynolds wove in elements of advanced observation, ridge overwatch, suppressed fire drills, subtly honoring the lesson without naming it. During inspections, his gaze on Harper lingered with a new measure, not suspicion, but the acknowledgement of depths beyond the uniform. Sergeant Major Hargrove embodied the shift most viscerally, his gravelly commands carrying a fractional warmth when assigning rotations. Harper's section on point for the beacons tab. Lead steady. The pace stick tapped less sharply now, its rhythm syncing with the thud of boots on the drill square, where the concrete still bore faint scuffs from that pivotal afternoon. Hargrove had pulled Harper aside one misty morning, the air crisp with the tang of wet heather, his voice low by the guardroom. "Seen enough parades to know when a man's carried more than his share. No need for words, just keep setting the example." It was praise distilled to essence, the non-commissioned officer's code. Respect through shared burden, not proclamation. The base itself seemed to adjust, its routines infused with an undercurrent of recalibrated hierarchy. In the motor pool, where lorries idled with the low cough of engines, mechanics nodded to Harper as he passed, their chatter halting briefly in deference. Whispers evolved from the barracks' dim corners, from the quiet one to fragments of the tale. Held the Wadi alone, they say. Shots from nowhere. The story circulated in hushed tones over mugs of tea in the NAFI, a legend forged not in embellishment, but in the regiment's terse authenticity. Thorne and Reed had departed after the week, their sand-colored berets vanishing into the hills, but their salute lingered like an etched insignia, a bridge between the ordinary ranks and the shadows of special operations. For Harper, the change registered internally, a subtle easing of the isolation that had cloaked him since his return from the sands. Nights in his bunk, the narrow space lit by a single bulb, brought no restless turning. The scar's faint itch was now a marker of purpose reclaimed, not concealed. He wrote no letters home, shared no anecdotes in the ablutions block's steam. Restraint remained his anchor. But in the quiet hours before reveille, he felt the unit's cohesion tighten, mockery dissolved into mutual regard. The 12 saved men, scattered across postings from Aldershot to Cyprus, learned of it through secure channels. A brief from the regiment, honoring the sniper who had been their unseen guardian. No names exchanged, but gratitude echoed in the ether, binding past to present. As autumn deepened, the rain turning the training yards to mirrors of slate, Credon Hill's parade square hosted a routine passing out for new recruits. Harper stood in the rear rank, posture unyielding as the young faces snapped salutes under the grey sky. Reynolds addressed them, his voice carrying over the wind. "Discipline is silent. It endures." The words, unspokenly aimed, drew a fractional turn of heads toward Harper, eyes holding respect earned in the wadi's fire. No one mocked him now. The transformation was complete. Woven into the fabric of daily orders, the clipped exchanges, the scent of wet concrete at dawn, the unyielding march of British military life. In this quiet evolution, the essence of the army revealed itself. Moral courage not in grand gestures, but in the steady hold of one's post, where injustice yields to the honor of service. Harper's legacy became the base's unspoken creed, a reminder that true professionalism whispers through the ranks, enduring beyond the parade's edge in the reserved dignity of those who bear the weight without demand. The hills of Hereford watched impassively, their mist-shrouded peaks a testament to the silent guardians who shaped them all. Months slipped into the relentless cycle of military seasons at Credenhill Garrison, the Hereford rain giving way to sporadic bursts of frost that rhymed the drill square's edges in brittle white. The base's routines persisted with unyielding precision. Reveille piercing the dawn mist at 05:30, the sharp crack of boots on concrete during morning parade, the low rumble of lorries ferrying supplies from the quartermaster's stores. Lance Corporal Ellis Harper navigated it all with the same measured gait, his beret tugged low against the wind that whispered down from the Brecon beacons, carrying the faint, crisp scent of pine and frozen earth. The revelation on the square had etched itself into the company's collective memory, not as a spectacle, but as a subtle recalibration, a shift in the hierarchy's undercurrents, where respect supplanted indifference without fanfare. In the barracks, where the air hung heavy with the tang of damp wool and boot polish, conversations evolved quietly. No one mocked Harper now. The casual jabs that had once punctuated stand-easies in the mess hall dissolved into silences more eloquent than words. Jenkins, whose elbow had jostled the rifle and whose laughter had echoed the spill, became a model of restraint. During equipment inspections, he positioned himself beside Harper, hands steady as he aligned his webbing, eyes meeting the Lance Corporal's with a nod that conveyed apology without utterance. "Section set, Lance Corp," he would say, voice even, the Manchester lilt subdued. Harper responded with a fractional incline of the head, his Midlands accent flat as he confirmed, "Carry on." It was enough. In the British Army, bonds reformed through shared duty, not declarations. The transformation permeated the ranks like ground frost, creeping across the training fields. Private Malone sought Harper's counsel during night navigation briefs. His questions posed in the dim glow of the map room, the scent of marker ink mingling with the earthy residue of outdoor drills. Ridge oversight, how to hold position without giveaway. Malone's tone held deference, the earlier amusement replaced by earnest focus. Harper's replies were concise, delivered in the clipped professionalism of one who had lived the lesson. Eyes on the flanks. Breathe steady. The shot finds itself. Davies and Tate mirrored the change, their banter in the naffy tempered, evolving into discussions of tactics drawn from fragments of the Wadi tale. Whispers of an unseen sniper who had covered 12 in the kill zone, his L115A3, a silent thread through the chaos. Captain Reynolds integrated the shift into command without ostentation, his Sandhurst-honed voice carrying subtle emphases during company addresses. "Observation demands patience," he noted one crisp morning on the parade square, the cold air sharp with the bite of impending winter, as the ranks stood at attention under a sky heavy with clouds. His eyes lingered on Harper, not pointedly, but with the acknowledgement of depths respected. In private, Reynolds adjusted rotations, placing Harper's section on advanced patrols that skirted the hill's edges, where the wind howled through hedgerows and the ground turned treacherous underfoot. The company commander had gleaned enough from secured briefs. The graze on Harper's forearm, earned holding the ridge as rounds walked the patrol's path, the call sign Wraith, a ghost in classified ledgers. No commendations followed. Such honours remained internal the regiment's way. Sergeant Major Hargrove embodied the reform most tangibly, his gravelly presence a constant on the square, pace stick tapping like a metronome against his calf. He assigned Harper to oversee recruit training, the young faces snapping to under the watchful eye of the beacon's looming silhouette. "Lead by example, Lance Corp," Hargrove murmured one evening in the sergeant's mess, the air thick with the aroma of stew and pipe smoke, his moustache twitching faintly. "You've set it already." It was praise pared to bone, the non-commissioned officer's code, recognition through trust, not effusion. Harper nodded, his posture unchanging, the scar a faint warmth under his sleeve as he drained his mug of tea. The base itself seemed to breathe differently, its rhythms infused with a quiet legend. In the motor pool, where engines coughed to life amid the scent of oil and exhaust, mechanics paused their chatter as Harper passed, offering nods that spoke of circulated stories. The sniper who had vanished into routine after saving the trapped 12, his presence felt but never flaunted. Whispers in the guardroom during long nights, the sodium lamps buzzing overhead, painted him not as hero but as exemplar, a man whose silence had endured mockery, emerging through truth into unyielding regard. The 12 saved soldiers, now dispersed to postings from Colchester to the Falklands, received terse updates through regiment channels, a salute in absentia. Gratitude etched in secure missives. Their debts converged in the ether, bolstering the bond without demand. For Harper, the legacy unfolded internally, a subtle unburdening amid the frost-rimed mornings. In his bunk at lights out, the narrow space lit by the faint glow from the corridor, he lay with eyes open to the ceiling's cracks, the day's weight settling like dew. The isolation that had cloaked him since Helmand lifted gradually, replaced by a solidarity woven from glances and gestures, the way Jenkins handed him a fresh brew without prompt, or how Tate covered his flank during a tab over sodden moors, the mud sucking at their boots in rhythmic protest. Emotion remained reserved, expressed in the steady set of his jaw during drills, the unblinking focus that scanned horizons real and remembered. He sought no spotlight. The routine of Credenhill, roll calls under grey skies, the clipped orders echoing off brick walls, sufficed, now enriched by the unit's recalibrated respect. As winter gripped the Welsh borders, the rain turning to sleet that lashed the windows, a joint exercise with adjacent battalions brought the company to the training yards at Aldershot for a week. Harper led his section through simulated extractions, the cold air over the yards carrying the sharp tang of frostbitten grass and blank ammunition. Observers from the regiment, unseen echoes of Thorn and Reed, noted his precision, but no words passed. Respect was in their stillness, the nod from a distance. Back at Credenhill, the tale rippled further, a quiet legend binding the base. Moral courage affirmed in the face of injustice. Public recognition transforming whispers into honor. In the end, British discipline revealed its core, not in thunderous salutes or overt triumphs, but in the silent endurance that forges unbreakable ranks. Harper's story became the unspoken creed of Hereford, silent honor prevailing, where the weight of service is borne with restraint, shaping guardians from the shadows into the light of everyday duty. The mist-shrouded hills stood sentinel, their quiet testimony to the professionalism that whispers through the ages, unyielding as the parade square's stone. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching the case of Who Saved Us, 12 soldiers trapped in a kill zone, rescued by an SAS sniper they never saw. See you in the next one.